Hi, everybody. My name is Ahmed Mehboob, and I'm Associate Professor in the Department of Linguistics at the University of Sydney. And this is the third short talk in relation to the course Doing Subaltern Linguistics. And in this particular video, I want to I've already sent you some notes and some descriptions of the steps we need to go through and some of the things that we need to do in order to continue with the projects. So I want to talk us through these steps in this video. So the first thing that you should have done by now already is identify an issue in your local context that you would like to focus on. Now, of course, the course is doing subaltern linguistics. So what we are doing is we are creating something to address a need that we have in our community. Now, in thinking about this need, we really need to be very focused. It's very easy for us to think of very big projects like, there's an issue of, for example, let's say abuse, let's say bullying across the country or across the city. Now, yes, it is an issue and we can address it. And yes, we have the expertise to address it. But the question is, can we really tackle that issue in one go? And the answer is probably no, right? So we can't really tackle the whole problem. So if we try to think too big, it's good to think big, but we need to start small. So what you would do if you would develop a project where you were going to create resources for the teachers, for the parents, for the school administration, for the students, and perhaps other people involved, then you would need to be able to work with and collaborate with a particular school or a teacher, right? Or if you're a teacher yourself, to work with, collaborate with some of the other teachers and the school administration. And then essentially, when you develop this material and once you have piloted it, once we have discussed it, once we're happy with the material, then when you have a place to implement it, right? So in a sense, you create a change from where you are. That's the key thing. So when you're thinking of your projects, think of where can I actually do this project? Do I have a location where I can implement it? So if you think of if you say, oh, I will just create web posters and web awareness things, well, that might be one thing you could do, but again, how much impact will it have? And especially in a world where, things and posts on Facebooks and social media, they disappear in a day or 2 days, right? So how many posts have a life of, or, shelf life of a few weeks or a few months or years? Not too many things, right? So therefore, we need to think of putting our energies into places where we can have an impact which is much longer in its effect. So, for example, again, if you would do something about bullying, then, and if you do it in a school, in a particular school with a particular group of students, teachers, administrators, then you're creating a change within that school. And that change is going to impact everybody who's part of that school. And it will perhaps also impact the community at large. So when you're thinking of identifying an issue, whatever that issue might be, think of it in terms of where is it that you can actually do this work. Now, in addition to identifying the issue, you really need to talk about the issue to people. Talk to as many people as you like. Don't worry about who it is. You can get the best advice from people that you don't expect, where you don't expect it to come from, right? So if you don't try to talk about your project, your ideas with a whole different range of people, then in a sense, how can you claim, or how can we claim that the work that we will produce will be of relevance to them, or will be something that they can use? So in a sense, we need to develop our understanding by talking to different people. Also, of course, involving people. It's great if you can actually involve other people in your project. So it's not just you doing it, but it's a bunch of people doing it with you. It could be your colleagues, it could be your students, it could be your family members. It could be anyone, depending on the nature of the project and who you're working with. It could be a local NGO, it could be a school district, it could be a school, it could be a company, or it should be a shop. It could be anywhere that you think that you can contribute. You can collaborate with the government, with the local government. You can collaborate with the local police. So there's so many things that you can do in collaboration with people. So if you're thinking of things locally and thinking of doing things in that will help your own community, then we should also be thinking about how they are actually part of the community. It's not one person or just a group of people. It's restricted number of people, but it's actually engages a larger number of people. So by engaging with people, by inviting them to be part of your project, by getting their input, getting their ideas, getting their comments on your drafts, all of that work will actually help your work become better, because you're doing work for the community. So their engagement is really important. So once you've done this, then you have to think about, all right, so now I'm doing this project, and as you're talking to people, you might realize, or somebody might give you a hint, or as you're researching your project, you will realize that there are other projects out there somewhere in other parts of the world that have tried to address similar concerns, right? So again, thinking of bullying in schools, it's something that people have tried to tackle around the world. So what sort of resources are out there already? Can you kind of use them? Can you, if you want to create your own, how will they be different? How would you make them that so that they are more relevant to your context? How will it represent your own local sort of needs and issues? So in a sense, thinking about looking at other things, and when you look at other things, you're sort of carrying out what we call a broad PDA. Now, I've already sent out some instructions about how to do a broad PDA, but essentially what you're doing is you're looking at how is it that the thing that you find has been successful, how do you think it achieves its success? Right? So because a thing is an entity, whether it's as a text, or whether it's some sort of a material, or whether it's some sort of let's say, a product, some kind of a policy. Now these things exist in some realities, and they operate through various mechanisms in terms of how they influence us, right? And very often what they do is they connect us to the material world in different ways, right? So if it's a product, you can touch it and see it, right? If it's a text, you can read through it. If it's images, you can recognize what the images mean, right? And in doing that, they can refer to other senses. So you can include references to food, which of course have an element of smell as well. You can have people showing each other, you can see people touching each other, so you get a sense of a sensory sort of touch within looking at things through a video, for example. So there's so many different things that happen through, and in order to make something successful. And what we're doing in a broad PDA is trying to analyze how are particular meanings projected in a thing by understanding how the thing utilizes the five senses. Right? Why do we want to do this? Because we want to think of language as being one aspect of the meanings that we create as human beings. And therefore, in order to try to create texts that work better within a socio-semiotic context, we need to design these things considering our local socio-semiotics. And so by socio-semiotics, we're looking at all the five senses and the various modes within each sense that we use in order to live our everyday lives. And again, I need to stress that humans typically have five material senses, but it's other people have 4 or 3 or less. And that doesn't make anybody lesser. What it means is that they're making meanings of the world through other sensory systems. And that's actually very important for us to understand, because, so for example, if we have let's say a deaf population around us, then it's extremely important that we learn sign language, and we understand sign language, and we educate parents about sign language. So if somebody does have a child who can't speak, then the parents interact with the child very early on in their life using sign language, so that the child is not deprived of language input, right? So these are important ways of thinking about language, which are typically lost if we're focusing just on the syntax or the sound system. So we want to see how there are other ways in which meanings are made, and we consider all of them in sort of both understanding how things work well, and also in applying them in when we are going to create our own work. right? So once you've identified projects, and of course at the same time you're reading the literature as much as you have access to, and reading about it not just in academic sources but also in popular media, in blogs, other places. Do have a look at everything, and in multiple languages. There's no harm in trying to look at things more broadly. And of course, the broader you think, your grasp of issues from different perspectives will become stronger, and that's something that builds over time, right? So we start from where we start. Now, once you've done a broad PDA, which is what we were talking about earlier, you will move on towards designing your material. Now, I will talk much more about when we come to the point where we are designing our material. But at this point, I think it's best to stop, take pause for a second, and focus more in terms of creating our idea for the project. What is it that we want to do? Right? It is because unless we know what it is that we want to do, unless we are pretty sure that our energies will be spent doing something that will create something which is positive in a community that we live in, we're sure that it's going to be applicable, it's relevant, it's a need that the community has, and it's a community's response that we're taking up. It's not our own. And it's done through languages and social semiotic processes that are locally oriented rather than in English or through English. So it's designed for a local audience and a local purpose. So once we've all got all of that stuff done, only then can we start thinking about what is it that we're actually designing and how are we actually designing it. So that's why I'm not very, I don't think we're in a hurry to get to that point. What I want us at this point in the course is that I want everybody to sort of have a very clear idea of what it is that they will be doing. And in order to do this, I am going to send you another form. It's called Designing Things form. And in the first part of the form, I'm just going to ask you to give your name, a title for the project. If you tell us what your goals or the outcomes of the project are, what do you hope to achieve through your project? And then, of course, tell us where you will implement the project. Give us details about the context, including people who will be using your material, people who will be working with you to develop this material. Give us as much details as possible about the implementation of where you think this is going to be implemented, because we need to realize and we need to think about how feasible a particular project is. Is it actually going to be something that might materialize into actual entity and an actual thing which is actually utilized, or is it more like an idea where we might spend a lot of time and perhaps not get anywhere at the end of the day? So we need to think about these things at this point of designing the project, because this is where where we start directing and channeling our energies into. So once we have our direction for the project, we put our energies into that project. And so it's really important that our choice of the project is an appropriate one. So, this form that I'm designing, I'm going to ask you to send an email back to me. And I think we need to start sort of getting some pace into the course. I've taken it easy because I know that most of you are also doing other things. You're studying, you're working, you have other exams, you have other things in life. And this is something that you're taking on a voluntary basis. And I really respect that and appreciate it, that you're doing this work with me. And I appreciate your time and commitment. So I definitely don't want us to be rushed in any of this thing. But I think at this point, we need to be getting pretty clear about what it is that we want to achieve through our work. So what I would like you to do is I'll send you the PDA Designing Things form very soon. You'll get a copy in the email. And if you don't, please email me and I'll send you a copy. And then once you fill this form out, please send it back to me, and I'll give you feedback on these and how we might share some of this work. And I might at that point even be able to make some groups in terms of the kind of focus that you have. So for people who are doing similar things, it might be useful to create a subgroup where you work on your projects. And of course, I'll be involved in each of these projects. So going back to the form, after you've talked about the implementation of where you plan to implement it and how you will implement it, tell us more about the significance of the project, of why it's important, Tell us a bit more about the sort of things that you're thinking about at this point in terms of what material or activities or what things will you create. Uh, Again, this is at this point is maybe something we will change, but it's good to have some sort of an idea as we're starting. And then what sort of things, readings, projects have you analyzed in developing your work so far? So, as you're completing this form, I want you to carry out some literature reviews, reviews of other projects, reviews of other websites, looking at other resources. Use whatever resources you have to try to explore the issue as much as you can. And keep track of that, because I think it's quite important for us to understand where you're coming from, what sort of things you're looking at, and what your thinking is, so that we can interact with you in relation to your own project. And that's essentially, in a way, that the course will move further, is through interaction via email and small group interactions, so that we can start working on creating things. And the first thing to do, of course, is to complete this form. So the date, I was thinking that how about if I say that if you can send me these forms by the 21st of April, so that's 2019. 21st will be Sunday, the next week, right? So see if you can try to send me this form back by then. So in addition to telling me a bit more about what you have been researching, if you can tell us a bit more about the alignment between what your design is for your project, what you're thinking of goals of your projects are, how are they connected to each other, how do you think you can achieve the goals that you're setting in the place that you're setting them for, by doing the kind of things that you are planning to do. So sort of reflection a bit here of how you think what you're thinking of is actually going to work. Also at this time, I think it's important for us to think about some of the challenges that you think you might face in developing and or implementing your project. So what are some of the things that can go wrong? Do you think that there might be people in the community or certain groups that might not like what you're doing? If that is the case, what's going on? We need to consider these things as we, before we take any step further, because we need to know of what the potential constraints are, because we need to design the project in a way to address these constraints. And if the constraints are too limiting, then we might have to perhaps even abandon a project. So it's extremely important to think about this question quite seriously and consider what the implications of what you're doing are, because you are doing something, right? So therefore there are implications. So there are both positive and potentially negative ones, and we need to think of the negative ones as we start planning our projects. All right. And so just tell us a bit more about the challenges and the potential negative consequences. And that's pretty much it for the form, really. All right. Anyway, if you have any questions, please let me know. Again, the information about analyzing things and doing broad PDA, you should already have the notes. These are also available on the academia site and through Facebook or LinkedIn sites. The form for designing things, I will be sending it out to you very shortly. All right. Thank you.